I was regarded at Harvard Business School as being a communist.
A brief is setting out your ambition. The brief from the Pope was make them believe.
Innovation is ideas having sex.
It takes the same amount of energy to try and do something great as it does to justify something average.
If I was a CMO and I'd give them a 3-word brief, make us famous.
Morning everybody, and welcome to another episode of WFA's Better Marketing Podcast. And here in the year of the rabbit, first of all, a happy Lunar New Year to you all out there. We're welcoming today one of Campaign's top 50 marketers in Asia, the Chief Brand Officer of AirAsia, to talk to us. Rudy, great to have you here. How are you?
Thanks, David. Very nice to meet you, and thanks for having me as well. So yeah, a little bit about myself. Where did I come from? Well, I kind of started from fresh. So I've been with AirAsia for close to 16 years now. A lot of people find that as a surprise, but I essentially joined the company as a freshie from university. Essentially, as the story goes for most uni students, I guess, right after completing my studies and getting my degree, I kind of took a break for a while. It was meant to be a 3-month break, and then got the kick up the bum by my parents to go and get a job. And I went for a couple of interviews and checked out AirAsia. So a low-cost carrier, it's something that I wasn't, honestly speaking, not 100% familiar with, but having spent time in Australia in the past when I was studying, I was very familiar with brands like Virgin Blue, which was, of course, another low-cost carrier. So I checked it out. I went for an interview for a PR role in communications, but coincidentally, at the same time, they actually had an opening for a brand position as well. So my CV kind of made its way to the head of commercial at that time, Kathleen Tan, and she had a look at my CV and she recommended me to, the brand team at the time. So I went in for an interview, and yeah, that's kind of where the whole thing started. Worked my way up from a brand executive to now the Chief Brand Officer of Capital A across the AirAsia Group. It's been 16 years.
Well, fantastic. That's a rapid rise too. But one of the things we all love about AirAsia is you've got a great entrepreneur at the helm who really does believe in people and giving people a chance, and you're certainly a great demonstration of that. Not many people become Chief Brand Officer within 16 years, so congratulations. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
And can we reflect a little bit on the last few years, because when we were lucky enough to be in Malaysia for the WFA Global Marketing Year, we had Tony Fernandez talk to us. And to hear their AirAsia story was fabulous, but those were in what we all remember as the pre-pandemic days when all was looking very rosy, and you were on a very good flight path altogether, numbers going through the roof, great things happening, and the pandemic must have caused some difficulties, but I know you've done all sorts of great work on the app and on building a community. So tell us a little bit about that, Rudy, if you could reflect on those times.
Sure. So exactly as you said, right? Pre-pandemic, we were really on the rise. It was great for us. At that time, I think we would have been the world's best low-cost airline for about, I think it would have been 11 or 12 years at that time. And coming from a brand that was really aimed to democratize air travel at the start in the early 2000s, we really led as a brand that was all about the people. So when the pandemic kind of kicked in, it kind of made it tough for us, obviously, from a travel perspective. But having said that, as a brand, we always had this spirit of daring to dream and obviously trying our best to make a difference as well. And because we had access to all these people and all this data that across the region and in Malaysia as well, the founders, especially Tony and Datuk Din as well, they always looked at it and think, let's not waste a crisis and find ways to continue serving the people and finding ways to make sure that our brand is relevant and we can connect with people as well, which is one of the most important things for us. So having said that, we essentially started looking into ways of connecting them through things that were relevant to people at that time, especially during the pandemic when there was the lockdown. We started looking into ways we could support people through food delivery, for example. And we even had our cabin crew and our pilots kind of pivoting and changing their job roles for a while to do this, to really support the community in the region, to support people in Malaysia and other parts of the country as well. But then from there, we've always been on this path of, I wouldn't say pivoting the brand, but really evolving the brand. Being an airline was really the start of our entire journey. at the end of the day, it ties back to the brand purpose of AirAsia, which is about connecting people and transforming lives. So really, the airline was the start of the whole journey, and the pandemic just essentially accelerated everything else that we intended to do from the get-go. Actually, pre-pandemic, we were already selling other airlines on our platform, on AirAsia.com at that time, which we recently just kind of evolved into more of a mobile ecosystem called AirAsia Super App. So it is through that we essentially accelerated the entire idea of what AirAsia was meant to be as an ecosystem, and I guess, for lack of a better word, as a lifestyle.
Okay, and can we talk a little bit about the Super App? Because as I've looked at it, one of the things I can see is you really are building a community, and you really are trying to add value through provision of things that your customers will want. From a business perspective, you're obviously building loyalty and looking to do those poorly named things, cross-selling and upselling. But tell us a little bit about the value add for customers, what you're seeing, what the data is telling you, Rudy. That'd be great to hear.
Like I mentioned, we've had access to all these travelers and flyers that have flown us over the past 20 years, right? So there's a lot of learnings in terms of what people are looking for, which kind of countries are they going to, what their booking habits are like, so on and so forth. And one of the things we thought about as well from a Super App perspective, and really if you think about an ecosystem, is exactly to your point, what else could we add in terms of value to the consumer? And for us, value, there's a couple of different ways to look at it, right? One of it is obviously from a cost perspective, and for us being a low-fare airline, that was very adamant already. But the next phase of that was an experiential value. How can we make things a lot more seamless for the consumer? How can we make the journey a lot more enjoyable as well? So when we started looking around the region, and we thought about how as a platform we could serve the typical travel needs, like give you the opportunity to book hotels on our platform as well, so that you just go to one platform to get everything, so on and so forth. The other layer to it was really when people go to these destinations, whether it's for business or whether it's for leisure, they also need things like transportation, for example. So then we started looking into things like ride-hailing. And when we brought ride-hailing into the ecosystem, if you think about it, that gives us the opportunity to really engage our consumers literally from end to end of their travel journey. So a very simple example would be if you were heading to Bali for a holiday, you can now book your flights on AirAsia from Kuala Lumpur to Bali. You can book a hotel on AirAsia Super App as well. And you can also reserve a ride-hailing car to pick you up from your home and take you to the airport in Kuala Lumpur. And then you'll get on that flight, which is an AirAsia flight to Bali. Once you land in Bali, you can also take an AirAsia ride-hailing car from the Bali airport to your hotel. And you would have actually booked that hotel on AirAsia as well. So we would have literally been with you all the way through your entire holiday experience. And one of the things that we were also looking at from a food delivery perspective was to not just serve people who needed food on a daily basis, but even travelers. Sometimes if you're at your hotel and you don't feel like going out, there's an opportunity for you to order food on the platform and have it sent to your hotel room. So you can see how we're really trying to make sure that we stay tight within the travel ecosystem, because travel is what we know best. And from the 20 years of experience we've had engaging with consumers across Southeast Asia and beyond, we find a big opportunity there.
And one of the data points that stuck out for me in this year's survey of global marketing leaders is that what a lot of marketeers are worried about is data ethics. And as particularly in the West, there's been a real focus on privacy. As you know, Google are beginning to change things, how digital advertising happens. But most people are in pursuit of what you're clearly building, which is first-party data. But when you have first-party data, it's incumbent on you to treat people fairly, not bombard them and so on. So how do you deal with this meaty issue of data ethics?
In a simple way for me to put it, there's always a checkbox, right? It's up to the consumer if they want to share the data with us. But ultimately, I think the sort of data that we are kind of tapping into in terms of the consumer's journey, I guess from a privacy point of view, it's a little bit more about your booking journey and what you're already doing with us. And we're just trying to add value to the consumer's journey, right? We're not necessarily saying that we're going to follow you all around across your Instagrams and your Facebooks and just be constantly bugging you. I mean, that's kind of a separate thing, that's advertising. But when it comes to within our ecosystem as well, what we're really trying to do is just enhance the journey to make sure you have an enjoyable one. So I think from that perspective, it's really about ensuring that the user still has it in their hands to be able to decide if they want to allow us to, be on that journey with them or not.
And how are you building the community? Because, I know there's an opportunity for you to use your 3 pillars here, and you could perhaps tell us about that a little bit, and how you've
Sure.
factored in the customer base you're building to enhance the community. Love to hear about that.
Sure. So the 3 pillars that you're talking about is essentially what we refer to as the 3 Ps: people, places, and passion. And this is something that I just started off with the team maybe about 8 years ago or so that we introduced into the brand, because the one thing we noticed again was that AirAsia was all about connecting people. And obviously as an airline at the time, it was all about taking people to places as well. And when you go to places, a lot of people have passions that they want to live out, or passions that are really like hobbies. So we figured that it's a very simple thing. It's the 3 Ps. If we can connect to any of those 3 Ps, or we can bring them together, we're really adding value to the consumer as well. And for us, one of the Ps, which is places, can be literal, taking you from point A to point B, but it can also be a figure of speech, right? Because AirAsia as a brand has always been about supporting people and daring to dream. And I think everyone has a place that they want to go in terms of something they want to achieve. So for us, the 3 Ps is not really just about a literal place, but also a figure of speech in a sense. Now, bringing that back to the community, within the AirAsia Super App, we have something that we refer to as AirAsia Chat, where people can essentially speak to each other or join communities that's based on destinations like Bali or Langkawi, or even communities that is filled with people who love food and just want to talk about different places to explore across Southeast Asia in terms of going on a foodie trail, for example. So having said that, with AirAsia Chat, we find that there's a space there where consumers within our platform can actually come together and speak to each other. And we want to kind of basically craft a space where people can connect, help each other out, provide tips and tricks about the region, and just, for lack of a better word, enjoy traveling and exploring the world together. And we find that that's a very simple way for us to connect that to the 3 Ps, because we can even create a surfing community, for example. And there are a lot of surfers that we know historically from our data as well, that a lot of people fly in from Australia to Bali for surfing holidays and surfing breaks. And if we set up a community within the AirAsia Super App for people to connect with each other and chat about, hey, this is the best place to go surfing in Bali, or maybe somebody within that community might say, actually, I found an even better place that's just off the coast in Lombok. And then we will have already made that connection, and then there's a potential for people to also become friends in real life and meet each other. So that's how we kind of view the 3 Ps, in a sense of connecting people, places, and passion.
So Rudy, can we talk a little bit about stickiness in the app? Because many of the things you're doing should be keeping people within the app, but many a digital promise fails on not delivering what the promise is. But as far as I can see, and obviously sadly I'm not off surfing in Bali, so I'm not in that community, but as far as I can see, people can stay in your app and fulfill all of these needs. They don't need to go outside the app. So is stickiness going up?
Definitely, there's something we're working towards too, right? So, before I talk about how we intend to grow stickiness, there's all these other things that people can kind of connect with and engage with or transact with within the platform. So like I mentioned, obviously in the past, we were purely just an airline. So you come to the app and you would use the app purely for a very specific scenario, which is to book a flight, to check in for your flight, or to check on your flight status, so on and so forth. Now that we've actually expanded our lines of businesses and offerings, there's plenty more reasons for you to come to our app, where it's not just based on that one scenario of you flying once a month, for example. You can come to us when you want to order food. You can come to us on a daily if you need to get a car from a ride-hailing perspective to go from your home to your office on a daily basis. You can even come to our app if you're essentially just looking for content to inspire you on where to go, because we also have content available on our platform now that stems from articles, video, and audio material as well. And a lot of people writing all this content actually used to be from our Travel 360 in-flight magazine team as well. So you can rest assured that you're getting content from people who know travel, people who wrote about travel for a living as well. So when it comes back to stickiness, through all these different things that I just spoke about, including the fact that we now have a community space where people can connect with each other, our hope is that we'll be able to drive up our stickiness and transactions as well from 3 times yearly, for example, because maybe an average user might fly 3 times a year to at least 36 times yearly, because there's so many more ways for you to transact with us beyond just flights. And then naturally, because you're coming to the app more, you're exploring content, you're speaking to people and joining communities, that stickiness should eventually go up as well.
And as you revenue model that, because I'm sure you do, what's that looking like as a marketplace, and what are the early signs of revenue growth?
Revenue growth would, in a nutshell, a simple way for me to put it would be positive, because the revenue stream now doesn't just come from an airline perspective. It comes from so many other things, and we're also creating lower entry barriers for consumers. So somebody who may not have experienced AirAsia in the past, from a flight perspective, can now experience the brand through a much lower entry barrier, such as food delivery. So you can see that the revenue would naturally grow from that perspective. It might be smaller growth for some new users, for example, but for existing users, it might also become exponential, because they see a lot more for them to experience now. So somebody who's coming to us to purchase a flight, the ancillary income in that sense is no longer just specific to what you can get within your low-cost flight in terms of ordering food or adding on baggage to your flight. The ancillary to us can actually also be from ride-hailing. It can also be from food delivery. It can also be from the fact that you're booking a hotel after you have booked your flights. So positive, I would say.
And is there value delivery? So do people get better prices the more they interact with you?
Yeah, so what we've actually introduced last year was a subscription model that we refer to as Super Plus. And that's something that we've kind of introduced to the market to kind of test out. And essentially what we're trying to offer to consumers as a value is if you subscribe to this Pass Super Plus, you essentially have access to free flights for a year. Obviously, as a low-cost airline, there will be embargo periods, so on and so forth. But if you look at it, it actually gives the consumer the opportunity to also enjoy more flights with us at a much lower cost. And what that means for us is that we'll be able to drive consumers in terms of traffic back to us a lot more often, because they have a reason to come back to us more if they have a subscription that's tied to the platform. And this subscription isn't just tied to the airline as well. It allows them to kind of use it across the entire ecosystem. So I believe, if I remember correctly, the last time we opened up the Super Plus subscription for consumers, it also includes things like free food delivery and discounts on your ride-hailing and so on.
Rudy, I'm really interested as an airline how you're thinking about sustainability and how you're thinking about people's carbon footprint, and is that as much an issue for AirAsia as it is for airlines in the West?
I wouldn't be able to speak fully to the sustainability piece. We actually have a chief sustainability officer, so I'm not going to want to say anything that might be off. But I can tell you this for sure from a brand point of view, that first, sustainability isn't purely about the environment as well. There's a lot to the AirAsia brand that actually covers sustainability, and this is even down to people. I think as a brand, we've always been about inclusivity. So we were actually one of the first airlines in the region as well to have quite a big number of our pilots be female pilots as well. We even had one of the first female captains for an A330 in the region. So for us, it's always been about inclusivity. For example, one of our stories is there's a guy who used to be a dispatch boy for the company. He's actually now flying A320s. I believe he's a second officer now, or he might be a captain already, in fact. But that sort of amazing story of how we give people opportunities and include everyone in experiences, I think that's a part of the sustainability story as well. But on the flip side, when you want to talk about environment, it's actually always been a part of AirAsia's DNA. And we were just talking about this the other day and realized that AirAsia has always been about being a low-cost brand, but ensuring high quality as well. And the one thing we landed on was that when you think about what we do as AirAsia, we do more with less. Because a lot of initiatives came into place. Of course, some of them came with the fact of okay, how can we manage our costs? But what ended up happening from that was also related to sustainability. So for example, our operations team in terms of flight ops actually introduced this thing that we refer to as single engine taxiing, which means when they're on the ground and moving the plane, they only use one engine to do that. And what that does is it means it burns less fuel. So we were already thinking of all these things ahead of time, and it was always in our DNA because of our low-cost model approach. It's just that we never put a tag to it and say we're doing this for sustainability. It's always been a part of our DNA. So we were not trying to tag anything to it to hype it up or whatever it was. It's naturally who AirAsia is.
Fantastic. And you may not have heard because of your headphones, but I just enjoyed hearing your employee engagement going up. Somebody's birthday. People were singing happy birthday in the background.
Yeah, I just heard that as well.
But can we just talk a little bit about employee engagement and employee brand metrics? Because one of the things I remember when we were looking at AirAsia a few years back was you really have built phenomenal brand ambassadors in the people that work for you. There are many airlines these days that when you actually engage with the people on the plane, one of them used to be the world's favorite airline, they will complain about what the airline itself is doing, and these are the frontline people. But you seem to me to have always focused on building internal brand ambassadors. What kind of programs do you have to do that?
Well, I think for us, it's I wouldn't call it a program, but it's just the idea of having a culture of people that kind of works as if we're a family. And that's actually something that's always been natural ever since, like I mentioned, I've been with the company for about 16 years, and ever since I joined the company in 2007, I've noticed that as being one of the most consistent things that I've experienced throughout my time here. In fact, a lot of people always ask me that with this being my first job and being here for 16 years, how is it that I've stayed on for so long? And I always say that one of the main reasons behind that is the people and the culture. Especially the way our founders, both Tony and Dato' Din as well, run the company and how they engage with staff. It really makes you feel like you're doing things together and as a family. And internally, we don't call ourselves staff or employees. We refer to each other as all-stars. That's the brand culture. And the idea behind that is because, everyone can be a star. In a sense, it's a part of who we are from the brand spirit, to dare to dream, right? Which is our current internal culture tagline anyway, to dare to dream. And I guess a lot of people are in it to win it together. We've built up this culture of, again, like I said, daring to dream, making it happen, changing the game, doing things differently, to a point that I think a lot of people bond over that, in the sense that they really just want to go out and make a difference, especially because we position the entire brand as being Southeast Asian and not just being a Malaysian brand or a Thai brand or Indonesian. We have offices all over Southeast Asia, and we champion that mindset of being an ASEAN brand. So it brings in people from all sorts of cultures across the region as well. But how we maintain that AirAsia spirit is through the AirAsia culture internally, which is the All-Stars.
Which is fantastic because, one of the other things on people's minds post the pandemic is talent retention and talent attraction. And you will know that when you arrive on the top 50 list of Asian marketeers in campaign, your phone rings with people telling you should go work somewhere else. So fantastic testament to the brand that you love where you work, you love what you do, and that builds loyalty as well. Tell me a little bit about, the tougher things, because, AirAsia has always built this dare to dream positive culture, but how do you deal with difficulties? How do you deal with things when they go wrong? What's the process in your mind there?
I think a very simple way for me to put it is with one word: together. And that's something that, as leaders of the company as well, a lot of the leaders practice that same sort of mentality there, that we're all in this together. So of course we've been through multiple tough times as well, right? Like right at the start of when AirAsia started in 2001, there was the unfortunate 9/11 incident.
Yeah.
So for our founders, it's like, we just started an airline and 9/11 has happened. This sounds like doom. But of course they managed to turn it around, and things kind of changed for the better as well. And then there was SARS and bird flu and all these other things as well, that people were not flying. We've had that unfortunate incident in the past in Indonesia as well, with a plane incident. But everyone bonded together, stuck together. And I think a lot of it was just about, because internally everyone has a love for the brand, and also because of the culture that we've built, that the togetherness, when the hard times happen, that's when you really see the all-star spirit come together. To a point, for example, when the pandemic happened, our pilots weren't flying, or cabin crew weren't flying, or planes were on the ground. But we wanted to make sure that they still had things to do and we were still serving people. Some of our pilots and cabin crew actually volunteered, put their hands up and said that if we're going to be doing food delivery, we'll be happy to drive a couple of cars and do delivery for the company. So in that sense, it really shows you that because of the culture we've built, people are willing to just help each other out and just get things done together and make things happen.
And when you think about metrics to measure the brand's success, what's important to you? What do you look at? What do you look at weekly, monthly?
It's predominantly awareness, I would say, from the start, and then obviously that top of mind. Are we the first brand people are thinking about when it comes to the airline space, right? So, of course, for us, that would have been the strongest thing, and it still is the strongest pull factor for the brand. Now that we've kind of added on more lines of businesses with the AirAsia Super App as well, you can also see the traction and difference between top of mind. So a lot of people think of AirAsia as an airline first. So the top of mind of that is through the roof. But when it comes to something like AirAsia Super App, within that space, within that industry, we're not necessarily the first brand that people think about. So then that also becomes a challenge from a brand point of view. It's like, okay, then we know that the airline has got very high top of mind. How do we convert that and leverage off that to grow the rest of our businesses? So obviously from a baseline metrics point of view, we're looking at general awareness and top of mind as well, and then the funnel conversion.
And how would you say the brand is doing? Because a lot of love for the brand, but any issues, anything that worries you?
I would say that a lot of people love the brand in the sense that because we've been around for the past 20 years as an airline and enabled so many people to fly. Obviously, there will also be detractors, especially at times like these. And I think the entire airline industry, for example, is facing it as well. With planes and operations coming out from hibernation and borders slowly starting to open up, and even airports that are still ramping up to what they used to be in terms of operations, there will be issues, there will be delays, there will be complaints, but I think it also just boils down to how we manage it as a brand. So there's a lot of things we're trying to look towards in terms of being a lot more transparent to our consumers as well. And I think for us, it's just more about the fact that a lot of our consumers have been with us for so many years, and we are really a brand that's about the people. So what we're trying to do now is that we've understood the kind of issues we've been going through from an operational point of view, and now how we're going to address it with our consumers and just do our best to make things right where we can.
Fantastic. And as we get near to the end, what advice have you got for our fellow marketeers? What can they take out of the AirAsia story and what you're up to, and how can they become better marketers?
Well, I guess for me, the number one thing would be to just be true to who you are as a brand. And I say that because, granted, a lot of people might say my experience has only been one brand. But what I've noticed being in one brand is that as long as you're consistent with what you stand for and what you want to do, whatever it is that your business evolves into or develops into, if your brand story and your brand purpose is the same, you wouldn't really lose sight of what you're meant to do. And I think for us, because our purpose has always been about connecting people, we could end up setting up AirAsia Space one day and fly to space. But there's a story we can tie around that about how a brand is about daring to dream and connecting people. So for all intents and purposes, I think having the brand story right is the most important thing, because of course there's going to be a lot of companies that will be just looking at your bottom line, looking at your revenue models and everything else, but ultimately it's always a question of which comes first. Is it a brand or is it a product? And I think you can have a product, but if you don't have the right brand for that product, then it's going to be very hard to sell it, because you need a story to sell that, right?
Couldn't agree more. As you know, I'm a big brand fan, and it's nice to see brands becoming more important, and it's nice to see an increase in people thinking long term despite the short term pressures. But Rudy, can I say thank you very much? Great to hear your story and the AirAsia stories. Thank you so much for taking the time with us, and to end where we started, Happy New Lunar Year to you. It'd be great if I could say that in your language. How do we say that in your language?
Kong hei fat choi.
I'll leave it to you to say it that way then. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, David.
Thanks, a pleasure. Thanks, bye. Well, that was fantastic to hear an enthusiastic and excellent practitioner at work, and it is indeed a great airline. So thank you again, Rudy. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time for better marketing. Take care.